there, it's Adam aka Swimming Bird, and welcome to Splatoon 2 on the Nintendo Switch. Today we're going to be playing on a brand new stage, Snapper Canal. But to start things off, we have a lot of exciting news to talk about, and off the hook here, we'll be covering most of it. There are a few things that they won't tell you about that I'm going to discuss a little later. I've got, my own pirate news thing going on in the alley by the coffee shop, but we'll worry about that then. First off, we have a Splatfest. It is Halloween themed for North America. Speaking of pirates, that was a previous one in the first game, Pirates vs. Ninjas. This one I think is a bit more fitting. In Europe, they have the age-old toilet paper debate over-under, and in Japan, it is power versus stamina, dualies versus brellas sort of theme. But what is North America going to be? It is the one I think a lot of us wanted way back in the first game. It's vampires versus werewolves. They're the sun-dodging immortals with an insatiable thirst for blood, vampires, versus the shape-shifting canines with supernatural strength, werewolves. This isn't even a contest. I mean, vampires are immortal, yo! Vampires might technically be able to live forever, but they're not immortal. Those suckers are super easy to slay. Ever heard of sunlight, garlic, steaks? Psst, steaks? You can't slay a vampire with a slab of meat. And another facepalm from Marina. Vamps don't even eat steak. They drink the juice inside of it like civilized beings. Werewolves, on the other hand, eat steak straight from the source. That's kind of cooler, in my opinion. They're mindless, slobbery dogs with zero sophistication or impulse control. Steaks, get real, Marina. Okay, Pearl. They went really heavy on that steak pun. Which monster is your favorite? Visit the Splatfest terminal and pick a side. And of course, we have other updates. I mentioned there is a new stage that's been added, Tentacular. It's Snapper Canal, almost like a blend of Piranha Pit in terms of the looks and the rough and tumble ways of the under the train bridge aesthetic, combined with a little bit of Black Belly Skate Park, in my opinion. And we also have a new weapon, the Bamboozler 14 Mark I. Really good set there, Curling Bomb and Tenta Missiles, to kind of make up for the fact that the Bamboozler is a little tough to use. It's a two-hit charger, which is very bizarre. So, yeah, we'll try it out here. There are other new weapons that have been put out as well, like the Rapid Blaster Pro, and the other one is a big deal, the Tentabrella, but I gotta unlock that later, so we'll have that on the horizon. It's level 23 to unlock. Listen up, Marina, because this is super important. Whatever you do, don't eat what? Your text box ran out of space. They're starting to get creative with some of these. I'm going with Team Werewolves. I always loved werewolves as a kid. Dressed up as one, never was a vampire for Halloween. I'm going with the werewolf, weird pumpkin-looking squid on the right. There we go. I know Marina tends to lose, but that is my choice. And we're going to head over to Sheldon. Once we get into battles, I will talk about some gear that is on the horizon. I did unlock the Luna Blaster. Luna Blaster may look cute, but its short-range exploding ink shots pack a serious wallop. It's got a decent fire rate, but lacks range, so it comes with splat bombs to keep your opponents right where you want them. The final blast, the Baller Special, provides is huge, too. Think about the map terrain around you when it's time to blow. So the Bamboozler 14 Mark I is a tribute weapon to a weapon used by the leader of a legendary squid squad, but it's been retooled for the battles of today, so Captain Cuttlefish used to use that one. I've used bamboo in my version to remain faithful to the original design, but as a trade-off, it can't store a charged shot. It lacks the damage of other chargers, but it has a good rate of fire and provides decent mobility when fully charged. With the included curling bombs, you can be effective at any range. When the time's right, you can also unleash the Tenta Missiles. So I'm actually going to save that. I've got a special episode on the way that I think will work well for the Bamboozler. Okay, we are going to quickly run through the giant October balance patch while we play on Snapper Canal. But before we start, you can also check out the description if you want to follow along the patch notes. I've got some news about gear. We have at least one new set on the way. I'm sure there'll be more as well. So, just like in Splatoon 1, the Japanese gaming magazine Famitsu held a contest where you could design your own armor, kind of like designing the old Mega Man Robot Masters back in the day. And in Splatoon 1, the winning set was that sushi chef outfit. This time, it's a ghillie suit, a kind of camouflage military uniform that is very heavily Ammonites and Sheldon based. There are some other ones that are amazing. I suggest checking them out because there's some cool stuff, like one that is designed to look like the training dummies where you look ridiculous but adorable. So hopefully more get added in the game as well. Let's get on to the patch notes because we have a lot to talk about, starting with the main weapon changes. So the Splash-O-Matic, they increase the firing range by roughly 6%. And they also increase the amount of ink splattered by each shot, making it easier to ink the ground. So that is already a good turfer. It's even better. 52 Gal, they increase the firing range by roughly 6%, but they did not change the range at which each of your shots deals more than 50 damage. So kind of a minor change there. The NZAP 85, they changed and made so your movement speed while swimming and running matches the Sploosh-O-Matic and Splattershot Jr. lighter weapons. They also increased movement speed while shooting by roughly 5%, and they made it easier to ink the area around your feet. So that is just a monster now because it already has ink armor. Next we have the Splattershot Pro and Forge Splattershot Pro. They had a bunch of changes. They increased the shot speed by roughly 67% while not changing the range. They increased weapon accuracy while shooting on the ground by roughly 10% and shooting after a jump by roughly 40%. They increased movement speed while shooting by roughly 10%, and they increased the radius of ink splatter caused by each shot by roughly 2%. So a bunch of minor adjustments, but in the hands of a skilled player, that thing is even more of a monster now. The 96 Gal, kind of like the Dynamo and others, was a beast in Splatoon 1, but not quite as effective in this game. Had some much needed buffs. They increased the damage of each shot by 52 to 62 damage. They also increased the accuracy when shooting on the ground by roughly 8%, and they increased the accuracy when shooting after a jump by roughly 40%. The H3 Nozzle Nose, they increased the shot speed by roughly 25% while not changing the range. They decreased the duration of weapon inaccuracy after jumping by 5/60ths of a second, very subtle but helpful. They decreased the time required for your weapon to be sort of inaccurate after you shoot by 15/60ths of a second, and then they made it easier to ink the area around the player's feet. Always good. The Clash Blaster, they increased the radius of shot explosions by roughly 14%, increased amount of ink coverage delivered by exploding shots, and then the Rollers, the Carbon Roller. When you're inking the ground continuously by holding down the firing button, you will now reach maximum movement speed 1 second faster, so that's pretty good. They made it easier to ink the ground in front of the player when using the horizontal swing, and they increased the damage dealt to the Baller Special with either vertical or horizontal swing by roughly 40%. We're going to see that a lot. The Baller had some big nerfs in the way of buffs to other weapons. The Splat Roller, Crack-On Splat Roller, and Hero Splat Roller, of course, they also increase the width of well, not the speed, but the width of the path when you're holding down the button to ink on the ground, and when you're moving at maximum speed by roughly 8%. They made it easier to ink the ground in front of you with a horizontal swing. That's kind of a common thread for all the rollers here to make them better. And they increased baller damage by 40%. Now the Dynamo, this one needed some major buffs, and it got them. They increased the width of ink when you're, inking on the ground continuously and moving at maximum speed by roughly 13%. So that's the biggest out of these in terms of extra turf. Not that you want to do that too often with the Dynamo, though. They slightly increased the width of ink coverage when using a horizontal swing from a higher location than the surrounding area, and they increased damage dealt to ballers by 60%. The Flingza, the last one of these rollers here, increased movement speed when roller is being swung overhead, made it easier to ink the ground in front of you with the when you're using the horizontal swing, increased the ink flung, and we'll get to more. Okay, back to the Flingza roller, going over to Turf Wars now. They increased the range of your ink flung in a horizontal swing by roughly 17%, the range at which you do maximum damage in horizontal by 25%, and of course baller damage by 40%. So lots of buffs to kind of make the Flingza more appealing, but it is more of a jack-of-all-trades thing. The Ink Brush, this is a really good one. We're using it here, but it is going to be better after the patch because when you are moving around in enemy ink and you are, inking the ground to zip all over, after the patch you will not take damage. And we're going to have some post-patch matches here too. But yeah, so you'll be able to go through enemy ink without needing ink resistance so much. And then baller damage increased by 40%. The Octobrush and Hero Brush Replica just increased baller damage by 40%. Classic Squiffer, Baller damage by 30%. All the Splat Chargers and normal Splatter Scope, you know, that variation, Splat Charger, Fire Fin, Splat Charger, that's Baller damage increased by 30%. The E-Leader, they increase the radius of ink coverage when you shoot the wall by roughly 33%, and then Baller damage by 30%. And the scope is the same, you know, E-Leader 4K scope is the same weapon, of course, just with a scope. The Bamboozler 14 Mark 1, the movement speed while charging, that already got a buff here, is increased by 50% roughly, and Baller damage 30%. The Gootuber, just like the Flingza being this weird variation, got a bunch of buffs. The charge shots, you can now store them while not at maximum charge, making you able to, you know, play a little more loosely about when you want to charge and move. They decrease the time between releasing a stored charge shot and shooting by 5/60ths of a second. They increase damage dealt by fully charged shots from 160 to 180. That's going to help against ink armor. And they increased the Baller damage by 30%. The Mini Splatling increased damage dealt from 28 to 32. Pretty big buff there, so you don't have to land as many shots to get the splat. They increase movement speed while charging by roughly 17% and increase movement speed while firing by 14% roughly. All of the dualies, they decrease the duration of downtime after performing a dodge roll by 8/60ths of a second. That's the Dapple dualies and all the variations of the normal Splat dualies. Now the dualie Squelchers got an even bigger buff. They increase radius of ink shot coverage by roughly 9%, and they decrease the duration of downtime, just like the others, by 8/60ths of a second. But also, you can now move after performing a dodge roll, but before you can perform the next action, so you're going to keep your dualies, you know, linked together to be like a Squelcher of old. The Splatbrella and the Tentabrella, these got a bunch of buffs. They're so much better post-patch. They decrease the time required to begin opening the umbrella by 8/60ths of a second. After beginning to open the umbrella, they also decrease the time required for it to open completely by 10/60ths of a second. Movement speed while the umbrella is open was buffed by roughly 38%. While keeping the maximum damage of one shot burst at 90, they increase the damage dealt by each shot that lands from 15 to 18. So just a good damage buff there, even if you're not getting those, you know, heavy hitting shots. The damage done to the umbrella by shooters other than blasters, Splatlings and dualies was reduced by roughly 30%, and the umbrella will no longer be destroyed immediately when coming into contact with the baller. It also does 30% more damage to the baller. The Tentabrella has some similar stuff. Ooh, we're getting closer to getting that, but we'll go into that in just a second. Okay, so this is, just a second was quite a bit of time. We are now post-patch, but I will continue with my patch notes. We left off at the Tentabrella, I believe. Yeah. Okay, so I got a note next to my notes. So we decreased the time with the Tentabrella, decreased the time required to return to your standard movement speed after shooting by 10/60ths of a second, so you can get back there quicker. We are using the normal umbrella here. They increase the damage delivered by each shot that lands from 15 to 17.5, increase maximum damage dealt by a shot burst from 120 to 122.5, decrease damage done to the umbrella by shooters other than blasters, Splatlings, and dualies by 30%. They will no longer be, the umbrella will no longer be destroyed when it hits a baller, and does more damage by 30% to ballers as well. The Aerospray, MG and RG, they got one of the few nerfs here. They decrease the radius of the point of shot contact by roughly 10%, decrease radius of shot ink coverage by roughly 8%, and decrease rate at which shots ink the ground by roughly 13%. So minor nerfs there. The Sloshing Machine weirdly got a nerf. They decrease the radius of ink coverage when the center of a shot hits the ground by roughly 20%. On to the specials. The Tentamissiles, they increase damage dealt to ballers by 50% when hit. The Stingray, opponents behind stage objects will now be revealed by the Stingray's beam, roughly 23% further away from previously. They also decrease baller damage by 100%. Inkjet hits the ballers with 100% more damage now. The Curling Bomb Launcher, they increase the distance of the curling bombs without being charged by 50%. The Ink Storm does 150% more damage to ballers. The Bubble Blower, the damage dealt to the bubbles by allied players has been increased by 20%, so they're easier to pop. They decrease the time to switch back to main weapons after creating the 3 bubbles by 20/60ths of a second, and baller damage up 100% from that. The Baller, they increase damage dealt by the weapon's explosion to opposing ballers by roughly 150%, which is kind of a nerf to ballers. And they also made movement speed of the weapon easier to hear for surrounding players and decreased the radius of minimum damage, that 55 damage range, dealt by the explosion of the weapon by roughly 14% if you're not using special power-up. And due to the changes with the gear, the radius is, kind of roughly the same as it was before. So not as crazy and easy to land a splat just by throwing that baller out. The Ink's abilities, Ink Saber Main, they increase the effectiveness of using it in lesser quantities like sub-abilities for Splattershot Pro and Forge, Luna Blaster, H3 Nozzle Nose, Dynamo Roller, E-Liter 4K, E-Liter 4K Scope, and the Tentabrella. Run speed up, they increase the movement speed when using this gear ability when shooting a Splatling by roughly 20%. And special power-up, all the previous functions of the ability remain unless indicated otherwise. So for Tenta missiles, they increased the maximum size of the targeting reticle by roughly 67%. For Ink Armor, the ability now also decreases the delay before the armor is deployed. The Inkjet, the ability also increases the shot explosion, radius in exchange, and the additional Inkjet duration afforded by the ability has been decreased by roughly 50% to balance that out if you're using special power-up. And Baller, the ability now also increases the radius at which it will deal that minimum damage, 55, when it explodes. And alongside the changes of the Baller itself, if you stack that ability, the radius is the same as it used to be. For the Inkstorm, the issue was fixed where the ability extended the range of the special could be thrown. Now the ability corresponds to the throwing range of the Inkstorm special. And we're going to try to get another match here so we can finish up the rest of these notes. Alright, more gear ability buffs. We have Quick Super Jump. They increase the effectiveness of using lesser quantities, just like the Ink Saber Main buff. Now stacking the maximum amount of Quick Super Jump will continue to have the same effect, and the total time from selecting your jump to landing remains unchanged. Sub power-up, a bunch of sub-weapons have some pretty big buffs. Ink Mines, they now have an increased tracking duration when you mark someone with them. Sprinklers, they increase the duration of time that the sprinkler sprays ink at maximum power by roughly 150%. Point sensors also have an increased duration of time to mark your opponents. And Squid Beacons, a lesser-known unsung hero of this ability, they now have a reduced super jump time even more by 50% when using sub power-up. Cold-Blooded, they increase tracking time shortening by 20%, and it also now increases the distance needed for the tracking effects of Thermal Ink, Haunt, and the Stingray, so a big buff to that lesser-used ability. Opening Gambit, the extra addition of ink resistance up is, going to add to that, along with all the other abilities it already has. Last Ditch Effort, all of the sub-abilities it adds, there are now 8 total instead of just the 6, so it's even better. Haunt, they reduce the distance needed for that to take effect by 23%, same with Thermal Ink, so those have been buffed. Respawn Punisher, they increase the reduction of a defeated opponent's special gauge from 5% to 15%, but they did the same for you from 7.5 to 22.5. And the final one of gear abilities, Drop Roller. They enabled rolls in all directions, so you could only roll forward previously, but now you can move wherever you want when you drop roll. And also remove the period of immobility immediately after using the ability, kind of similar to the buff to the dualies. Alright, on to the different special, the points needed to get your special for different weapons. The Aerospray MG was reduced to 160 points. The Slosher and the Replica down to 180. Mini Splatlings also 180, same with the dualies, just the normal splat dualies. The End Parries are also down to 180. Splattershot and Shot Replica are up to 190. Here, the rest of these are going to be nerfs. 52 Gal takes 190, L3 Nozzle Nose 180, Sloshing Machine 190, and the Splatbrella and Replica up to 180. So kind of some changes there to balance out some of the buffs that those weapons got. Now on to just general changes. In ranked mode, previously when you go down in ranked in S+, 1 or higher, you could drop all the way down to S+0 all at once. Now it's limited to 5 ranks going down. And in conjunction with that, if you want to be safe and maintain your current S+ rank, you now have to have at least 50% of your meter full, rather than 40%. Salmon Run, they fixed an issue causing certain combinations of main and special weapons to not appear. There was an issue where you would not be able to, you'd fall through the stage if you tried to super jump from an edge of a level with the life preserver at the end of the waves. Disparities with how the Goldie shows up in waves. You could throw a bomb when the Flyfish missile launchers were closed at the right time and actually still blow them up. There was issues with Chum, Small Fry, and Cohawks doing tons of damage to you when you're on a wall. The Slosher was not reviving people at point-blank range. And there was an issue with gear abilities if you had a couple different pieces of gear you earned getting the same ability unexpectedly. In spectator mode, there was different animation disparities with ink rails and splash walls, and some sound effects were not playing right, but they fixed that. In general multiplayer, Ink Resistance Up now has some benefits because it previously, with these three things, only worked when you maximized your ink resistance up. So now it works correctly, and these are moving while shooting a shooter weapon, and as well as moving while shooting a dually weapon, and moving while preparing to throw a sub-weapon. So ink resistance up, that's a change that was intended originally, but is basically a buff, because it works right now. And when you're restoring a charge shot with a charger, if you swum into enemy ink and return to kid form, you would lose that charge, and you can now maintain it. So it didn't, just null it out if you hit enemy ink while swimming. There's also an issue where you wouldn't be able to shoot after you had a charge shot that expired. They decreased the knockback when coming into contact with a roller that has run out of ink or is in mid-air. And there's an issue with the aiming reticle of the roller umbrella and some other stuff with the umbrellas and where it was rolling, shooting in off directions and stuff. There's also disparity of movement speed when you're shooting your umbrella with no ink remaining, opposed to shooting it with ink in your tank. Slosher weapons, when you're shooting, it would look like they were shooting from a higher position than they appeared to. There was players hiding behind a splash wall occasionally would get hit by a bomb still if you hit the edge of the wall. There was weird stuff with speed of curling bombs when they're going up slope surfaces. Bombs were not inking the floor at the very edge of a stage. There was an issue with predicting sub-weapon throws of like point sensors and toxic mist if he had an Inkstorm special going, and the inking effects of the Inkstorm would occur unnaturally when it intersected with a roof or something. Bubbles from the bubble blower will no longer turf the stage if they blow up after a match ends, so you can't just save it for the end and go crazy and have all this extra turf at the end. And then your movement speed while firing the bubble blower was varying when main weapons were equipped. The Rainmaker, if you want to, you grab that while you have a Dynamo Roller or an E-Liter 4K, which typically swims slower. You don't swim slower when you're holding the Rainmaker to even that out. There was issues in Rainmaker where if you splatted a player with a Rainmaker while they were jumping, it would put the Rainmaker where they jumped from and not where they should have been. There's issues on the reef where suction bombs were going around the bridge and sinking inside. Places in Inkblot Art Academy where if you were trying to roll or use Umbrella, you would fall through the stage. Moray Towers had stuff where you could fall off the center of the stage faster. Manta Maria, you could glitch into certain pillars. And the drop roller ability, if you were players returning to your starting point after an inkjet were unable to roll, if they were going into squid form. And there's just some general, fixes with drawing your posts and things like that, and you now cannot matchmake with people from an earlier version. Thank you guys so much. There's tons of changes. Please leave a like if you enjoyed this. Maybe subscribe if you haven't. We got the big Halloween Splatfest that I hope you'll check out. And there we go. A big blitz through all those, but please check out the link in the description to check that out yourself. Thanks again. Goodbye.